Hey folks, Michael here, Life Along the Way. Good to have you back. The last time we ended our video talking about ceremony, and we talked about how we were going to talk about our liturgy, our Eucharistic liturgy this week. And that's what we're going to do, is we're going to have kind of a introduction to the preparation for the liturgy and some beginning thoughts. And one of the things that I talked about last week is that sometimes when we talk about this stuff, when we talk about the liturgy, there's something's lost. We're talking about something that we're supposed to do, something we're supposed to experience, and simply talking about it can a lot can be lost. And so as we're going to go through these next few videos and sessions about talking about the liturgy, still what I want to make clear is you have to go and experience it to really understand it. But this time we're going to talk about the Eucharistic liturgy, and specifically getting ready for it and understanding it properly. So let's get started. So we're talking this week about some preparatory ideas and some ways to approach and understand what the liturgy is all about the worship of God in spirit and in truth as Christians, and in a historical manner, in a way that's consistent with the way that Christians have worshiped God throughout history, going back to the time of the apostles. And when we think about the liturgy, you may or may not know that it's a combination of words that essentially mean the work of the people, and that's going to be a big common theme that we'll talk about in this. Is that this is the work of the people. It's not the work of the priest, or not the work of the clergy. I'm very anti-clericalism, and I think that we sometimes tacitly affirm clericalism by the way that we go about the liturgy. But a couple introductory thoughts as we're thinking about the liturgy is the liturgy is, a lot of times we will look at the booklet that we have, and we'll talk about that as the liturgy. And that's outlining the liturgy. That is what we're going to say, what we're going to do, and the instructions for us. But really, as long as we need that booklet, we have not yet experienced the fullness of what Christian worship is, what the liturgy is intended to be, a work of the people, not just a people sitting around reading. Like if we were rehearsing a play for the first time, we might just sit around the room and read from a script. And I've been in worship services where that's essentially what we did. And I've been in other sorts of prayer services, and maybe you have as well, where we kind of all just sat there with our nose in the book, and I read the lines that said priest, and you read the lines that said the people, and that's all we did. And we were never really present with worship. We were never worshiping God in spirit. We may have been worshiping in truth, but not much in spirit. We were just reading the words on a page. And so one thing to think about is that as you may be for the first time, or after, even if you've been doing it for a while, entering into liturgical worship, then to understand that until you no longer need the book, you haven't yet experienced the fullness of what it means to worship in this way. And unfortunately, some of you may be parts of churches where the liturgy changes regularly. It's always changing. There's always new parts to it, and that's unfortunate, because that's not. It should be more or less the same every week, so that we can learn it, so that we can learn how to participate in it. But yeah, sure, there might be a different prayer. Usually that would be said by an officiant anyway, and perhaps different hymns. We have different psalms that we might recite together, but oftentimes those even are with the congregation just singing the same lines of the psalm in response to a cantor or just a reader. That would be ideal. And then, obviously the readings are different and the sermon is different, but most of those parts that are changing are the parts that are for the officiants, the priests and the deacons and other participants in the conduction up front of the liturgy. But the parts that the people are doing should more or less be the same. There may be some seasonal changes, but more or less that should be the same. And that gives us the opportunity to learn it and to fully engage in what it is. We, at the same time, the other idea, the other wrong thing is that simply doing the thing is somehow worshiping God in spirit and in truth. We can make an idol of the form. We can make an idol of getting liturgy right. Good liturgy did not die on the cross for our sin. And so we can make an idol of that. We talked about when we were talking about the creation, how all of creation was given to us to be transparent to God, that we were to experience God through the creation. And the same can be said about the liturgy, is that we are to experience God, we are to come and to offer our worship to God through the liturgy, but just doing the form can become an idol for us. Sometimes it might be a crutch that we actually need to get through a hard time in life, but it also can become an idol for us where it's just empty and cold words. And Jesus, as he told the woman at the well, that God is looking for worshipers who will worship Him in spirit and in truth. And the liturgy provides truth. It provides us with a way of knowing that we are worshiping God in a way that is consistent with history, with Christians throughout history. But we are still to bring our own selves to offer to Him in sacrifice and thanksgiving and praise and the Spirit. But when we make it making the liturgy an empty idol is not anything new that's new to the Christian church, right? Jesus told Isaiah in his prophecy to Isaiah, he said that your incense is an abomination to me. He had directed them to use incense, so it wasn't just the fact that they were using it, but it was an empty worship. It had no meaning, that the form had no longer become transparent to God, that they were not seeing God in it, that they were not approaching the true God in it, and they were just doing the forms, doing the activities, trying to get liturgy right, and that is not going to save you. It is about a people coming together, people coming together, people of prayer coming together for worship. And it's an important, it has a form so that we all know our roles. You can think about what would a football play like? Well, we see it all the time. When kids play football out in the yard, it's usually just the quarterback gets the hike and goes back, and everybody's just kind of running and doing their own thing, and the quarterback is really the one in charge to figure out what's going to happen. And that can happen in a lot of our churches, and the idea of a liturgy is that we are more like a real football team, and that we all know our roles in there. We know where we're going to be and what we're going to do, so that it will truly be a work and an offering of the people, not just a work and offering of an individual who is ordained clergy. And at the same time, the form, like once again, it's not magical incantations that will fail to work if we don't get the word exactly right, or if we don't do the movement exactly right, that somehow we will confect a frog rather than the body and blood of Christ. This isn't magic we're talking about. The form is good. It allows us to know how we ought to be coming together, but it is not a magical spell that we're trying to summon up the genie if we can get the word and the action just right. And as we're thinking about the ceremony, and last week we spent a lot of time talking about ceremony. And ceremony, this is not a plug for high ceremony or low ceremony, whatever you're talking about. In my opinion, ceremony should be appropriate to the context. And so if we were in a 400-year-old cathedral, beautiful stained glass windows, high ceilings, incredibly big altar, large choir, and I were to celebrate dressed like I am right now, that wouldn't be really participating in ceremony in a way that's consistent with the context. Likewise, every week I'm going over to Mexico and I do a communion service with the staff of a mission group over there. And we do it just in the staff lounge, essentially. And we're moving stuff off of a table to set up an altar space. And if I were to try to put on an alb and a chasuble and bring in incense into that space, that also would not be appropriate to the context. The ceremony can always go higher and it can always go lower. And we should figure out ceremony that's appropriate to the context. And so with those introductory remarks about the liturgy itself, I have a few more things I want to talk about before we actually get into the specific words, the specific actions of our Eucharistic liturgy, which we won't do in this video, where this is all about preparation. And one of the things that's important to understand is that as Anglicans, we believe in the priesthood of all believers. The priesthood of all believers, that we all have a role in the liturgy. And for me, as the priest, or we'll say a presbyter, we'll use that term, it means the same thing. As the presbyter, and the leader of the congregation, my role is different than your role, but it's not more important than your role. That we all are required to be part of this worshiping and this gathering of the body of Christ and offering of the sacrifice of praise and thanksgiving. And so my role may be different, but it is not more important. And we're going to talk about ways that sometimes as within the congregation we tacitly affirm that my role is more important, and maybe the only important one, and that's not correct. But as a priesthood of all believers, a good question to ask is, do you know how to be a priest? You are a priest in the way, when you're told by Peter that you are a royal priesthood, he means that in a way that's very similar to the Levitical priesthood. And do you know how to be a priest? And so part of that is knowing how to conduct the services that God has ordained would have been what Levitical priests needed to know. And so my question to you is, do you know how to participate as a priest, as one who is offering the sacrifice of praise and thanksgiving? Do you know how to function in that way? And one of the most important parts of that is just knowing what we're going to do and what we're going to say. And we're going to talk about that a little bit more in a minute. But when I sit in the congregation, in the past down here at the mission, when we've had other priests on our staff and they would be leading, I would sit in the congregation. And yet I would still be saying with the priest, whoever it was that was leading us that week, I would be saying all the words. I would be standing there saying all his parts, I would say quietly with him, and then our parts as the congregation, I would say loudly with the congregation. Even when we got up there to the prayers of consecration at the Eucharist, I know what we're saying, and I would just mouth them along with him. And that's what we should all be doing, is we should all know how the parts that we're saying, we're all offering it, and the presbyter is giving voice to the things that we're all offering. And then at certain points, the congregation is assenting loudly and singing loudly, and other times we're just, you can think it, you can say it quietly. All that is good. We're all offering this sacrifice and praise and thanksgiving. Another important thing, and we're going to talk about this in just a second again in more depth, is that the service can't start without you properly. If you are a baptized member of the body of Christ, then your congregation is missing one of its members, like in the way that Paul talks about that, means like it's missing its hand until you show up. If you're the hand for the body of Christ, it's missing the hand until you're there. And you are a part of the priesthood that is offering the sacrifice of praise and thanksgiving. And it can't properly start without you. It's limping. It's somehow it's in some way disabled. The body is until it is all gathered there. And so to think about that, I said earlier that there's many things that we do. I use the word clericalism. And clericalism just means, if you don't know, it means where we think that the ordained clergy are the only important parts of the church. Whether that means they're the only people who are properly ministers out in the world, which is not what we believe in the Anglican Church, or that they're the only people who are important to the Eucharist or any other service, which is not what we believe in the Anglican Church. We believe that the whole body is important. But clericalism is any times that we, as a congregation, as part of the congregation, part of the laity, part of the people, we say, oh, I'm not important, or I'm not as important as they are. You know, it can start without me. I'll be there in a little bit. That just assumes that you're not important. And so there's all sorts of ways that we tacitly affirm clericalism by our lack of participating as the full priesthood that we are as the body of Christ. And, you know, some things to think about. And this isn't trying to be judgmental, it's just wanting you to think about these things pastorally. Is, do you plan, do you plan your whole week or around worship? You are a priest. Part of the royal priesthood, and it's important for you to be able to offer the sacrifice of praise and thanksgiving on Sunday morning or whenever it is in your congregation. Do you plan your whole week around that being an important thing that you've been called to do? Do you plan your weekend around like making sure that you are ready to go? I often think about if we had a huge business deal going on a Tuesday morning, would our Monday night look? How would our Monday night look differently if we had a huge business deal going down early on Tuesday morning? Well, we have a huge deal of some sort, a worshiping of God, the eternal God, on Sunday morning. How does our weekend look different as Christians as we prepare for that, and as we think that we are going to be priests offering this sacrifice? And how does our whole morning on Sunday morning look as we get ready for worship? Because the liturgy starts, at your baptism, in a sense, and you can say it starts every week when you're planning your calendar, but certainly in a more immediate sense, it starts when you wake up on Sunday morning, or the day of whenever you are gathering for worship, which traditionally has been Sunday morning. But it starts then, as you prepare, as you get yourself ready to go and offer the sacrifice of praise and thanksgiving, to offer your souls and bodies. And if there's one thing that this video hopefully will convey, is how important you are to the proper worship of God. How important you are, and that it's no less important than the priest that is leading the service, or the deacons that are helping, or even the lay people who have a particular role up front in a particular week. Everybody, the congregation, is so important to that. And I want you to evaluate your life. What kind of things do you do that tacitly affirm clericalism, that tacitly say, hey, the priest is more important. They'll get going because the priest is there. Whatever that case may be. That all is tacit affirmation of clericalism. But I want you to be anti-clerical. Every role that you take on in preparing for worship, whether that's altar guild or whatever you call it at your church, whether that's sweeping or cleaning, whether that's buying stuff, whatever it might be. There's so many different roles in preparing for worship. Every role that you take on is anti-clericalism. You know, every action that you take that demonstrates that you take your role in worship seriously is anti-clericalism. Whether that has to do with when you arrive, staying late, cleaning up, worshiping, participating, everything, fully participating in the worship of God is showing that you are a priest, that you are part of the royal priesthood. It is anti-clericalism. Knowing what to do in the liturgy, what to say, and doing and saying those things as an active participant, as a priest. That is anti-clericalism, and that's what I want you to do. Knowing the liturgy, knowing what to say, knowing the actions to do, knowing the songs that we're going to sing, and being able to participate in all these things as an active participant. That is anti-clericalism. You know, I recommend trying to commit to memory the static parts of the liturgy, of the worship service. Commit to memory the songs that we sing, so that you don't need the book, so that you can experience the fullness of what liturgical worship is supposed to be. Help your kids do the same. Help people who are new, maybe just coming in, to do the same. And you know, if someone comes into our church and is kind of turned off because everybody's just staring at a book, maybe they're legitimately turned off. But if they come into our church and everybody is worshiping as a royal priesthood, and they happen to need a book because they're brand new, and yet there's hospitable people helping them to figure out their way to do that, that's going to be a totally new experience for that person. Act as if your role is every bit as important as mine, because that is the reality, that is the truth. That is anti-clericalism. Fight the power of clericalism, my friends. And thank you for joining me. God bless you on your journey. I'll see you down the road.